Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you, Brother Chris Ludke.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to explore alchemy, Freemasonry, and any possible connection that there may be. And I'm going to warn you in advance, I'm not going to give you the answer you're looking for, which is typically an unqualified yes. It's very qualified, it's very muddy, and it's perfect for this podcast. Freemasonry is related or associated with alchemy in the same manner that it is with astrology or many other occult topics. Their relationship with the craft is not causative, but associative. In the majority of cases, only coincidentally. The fact that they coexisted at the same time oftentimes means that there will be parallels between certain ideas and Masonic ideas. Freemasonry, for example, emerges from an esoteric soup that existed in the late Renaissance on the cusp of the period known as the Baroque, during which imperialism became the new norm for learning about the natural world. We're just at the beginning of the Enlightenment, as opposed to tradition, imitation, and a reliance on, and they focus on this reliance on truth rather than revealed truth. In the visual arts, this meant the direct observation of nature rather than copying classical works blindly. For artists with a Neoplatonic orientation, Plato having just been reintroduced into Europe, this meant reflecting on the inner idea or image of ideal forms, eternal in the mind of God, to put one way. The idea being we need to focus as artists on creating ideal forms that can only exist in the ideal world of figures like, well, God. On another front, philosophy emerged from being a tool of Christian apologetics, using Aristotle and Plato to some degree, to one that became fiercely independent and much more reliant on direct reasoning and questioning, beginning with doubt, not faith. In this culture, in this context, Masonry did not develop from any particular line or tradition other than one, its descent or evolution from various guilds beginning in the late 1500s and during the 1600s, becoming a gentleman's really intellectual society with a speculative orientation instead of an operative one. Along its path to emergence as what Freemasonry is today, its members have been involved with, or at least interested in, all emerging schools of thought in society around them, as well as those in the past, things like alchemy. So where does alchemy come from? And how does it relate to Masonry? Well, modern chemistry emerged, or better yet, began to diverge from alchemy as its own practitioners became increasingly aware that the model of the material universe upon which alchemical operations presumed to operate was not accurate. So we move from alchemy into chemistry. One becomes the other. There were not just four elements, but many. At the same time, we see similar rifts between astrology and astronomy at about the same time. The geocentric model gave way to the complex heliocentric one. In other words, the Earth moved from the center to the sun. So these ideas are changing. We're seeing this separation between belief and scientific evidence. One of the men associated with the development of modern science, of course, is Francis Bacon. In 1626, he publishes The New Atlantis, an outline for future inquiry that makes one think of Jules Verne. Bacon was a precursor of and inspiration to the men who a generation later would found the Royal Society, whose motto is question everything. A charge that also caused many to study alchemy. Among the members of the Royal Society were men who were known to be Freemasons, such as Ashmole, the first self-identified Freemason whose journals we use going back to the 1600s. The architect Christopher Wren, Sir Isaac Newton may have also been a member. But the thing to understand about alchemy is the principle behind it. Alchemy is not about science in our current understanding, nor is it about turning lead into gold. It was about finding perfection. It was about taking the flawed human condition, lead, and making it spiritual, gold, because gold does not oxidize. Gold is a perfect metal. It does not discolor. It does not do anything. It's as if time itself doesn't actually affect gold in any way, shape, or form. It makes it immortal. And that immortality, the symbolism of that immortality, of that perfection of gold, is what the alchemists were after. Sure, they were using chemicals and material means to try and chase that down. They were trying to find a way that they could create something that would perfect the human spirit, but it's not about the gold. It's about the symbolism of the gold. So Bacon is out there. He's writing in the New Atlantis, for example, forward-looking utopian literature. Some of it looking at ideas that are very, very Masonic today. And we see around this time that idea that Freemasonry goes back to Solomon as a model of society, and Solomon himself becoming a model of an inquiring mind hidden from the world. A similar and closely related movement, or at least powerful idea, had set European intellectuals, religious, and political circles aflame a decade or so earlier with the Rosicrucian scare. One cannot even compare the state of European intellectual inquiry in its medieval period with that of the Muslim world and their study of the natural world, hand in hand with astrology and alchemy. Europeans had little belief beyond traditional herbal medicine, informed by astrology. The Muslim world also had many superstitions and inaccuracies, but proceeded along the lines of inquiry that most closely resemble what we might call medicine today. Its practitioners were men of medicine and philosophy. And these ideas are what will flow into Italy, into France at the early Renaissance and kick off that intellectual movement. Even some relatively enlightened Christian kings during the 1200s attracted scholars from all over the known world to attempt to elevate human knowledge. So when we look at alchemy, what's going on is we have these chemists who are deep and devout Muslims. It starts in the Arab area, the Arab Peninsula. They're fierce monotheists. They were convinced of the ultimate unity of all things, since all things came from God. They sought and found that unity through geometry. Phi, the ratio found in all living things, 1.618 to 1, crystals, and even later in the arms of the galaxies. Thus, the unity and operations of the external universe, which we operate in and can operate upon, showed a hidden harmony and relationship with the inner or invisible universe. The reasoning went that if you do something in the outer world, it had consequences on the world that we cannot see, on the spiritual. The idea being as above, so below. This was a major tenet of alchemy. The idea is expressed in the Emerald Tablet, attributed to a figure known as Hermes, now known to be fictitious. And what we see are composite figures associated with Thoth or even Seth, depending on the sources. These remaining books attributed to him escaped the destruction of the Byzantine Empire in 1453 and were translated in Florence into English by Sir Walter Scott. Hence, alongside physical manipulation of the universe, the basest trick of which would become the famous goal of transmuting base metals such as lead into gold, the real goal of the alchemist was inner transformation. The idea of the kingdom of heaven being within is one that resonated with them. They're trying to perfect humanity. They're trying to use a mix of philosophy and materials. They're trying to take phi, the golden ratio, which seems to describe the natural world very, very well, and find a way to apply that to spirituality, to get us to a higher plane, a higher degree. So how did alchemy impact mainstream thought? Well, on one hand, the most universally important, alchemy impacted the world, giving rise to modern chemistry. However, its most long-lasting impact is still felt among those who may merely study as opposed to practice alchemy. that of transformation. The model or allegory of transmutation of lead into gold is symbolized by the 7 metals that are associated in retrograde fashion with the 7 days of the week, beginning with Saturday lead and ending with Sunday, associated with gold. This symbolism is very ancient. The 7 colors associated with the 7 metals were also painted on 7 successive levels of the Babylonian ziggurats, and later on the 7 rungs of the ladder of the Mithraic tradition. These similarities, no matter how perfect, do not constitute evidence of one continuous mystic stream. Rather, the way in which symbols ebb and flow through time and civilization, often preserving the meaning because they are capable of transcending language. In simpler terms, when you look at alchemy, it's more like a tree. Yes, we would recognize that trunk as alchemy, and yes, they do talk about turning lead into gold in that trunk, or creating the Philosopher's Stone, or whatever else. But from that idea, we get all these branches in alchemy. Everyone pursues their own ideas, hoping to feed back into the trunk at one time. But what you get is this very broad, spectacularly beautiful form, which is alchemy. And we have all these traditions feeding into it, whether it's the Arabic tradition, the Muslim tradition, whether it's Egyptian religion and thought, whether it's Greek philosophy. These are all tying in like the roots into the tree to create what we know of as alchemy. So how did Masonic tradition evolve out of alchemy? Well, again, the question is begging for a yes. I'd love to give that to you, but it's very qualified. So here's the problem. We need a strong dose of intellectual caution, along with the encouragement to pursue deeper sources on this very brief primer. Masonry's past is not explained, nor should it be understood as consisting of one continual stream from antiquity to the present. It's more like a rope, consisting of many fibers of various lengths, some of which touch each other by overlapping or being intertwined, but none of which touch all the others along the whole length. Like alchemy, Masonry is about the development, or at least the development of the salient features of life's journey from cradle to death. Its members believe in the influence of our actions on our inner life and on the world, and depending on one's theology, how those actions may impact our life beyond the grave. In terms of symbolism, in Masonic tradition, by digging within ourselves, sifting the good from the bad, the meaningful from the unmeaningful, we can find the hidden stone, much like the builder breaks off the rough edges of a stone to fit it for the builder's use. As we remove the detritus and the distractions of life, we will become better acquainted with the potential of our perfect ashlar. When we look at alchemy, what we're seeing is what I would term parallel development. So we have this idea of alchemy, the perfection of the human condition, and we have Masonry, which is the perfection of the human condition. And we have many, many threads that touch. Newton, Bacon, Ashmole, and others who are Masons or maybe associated with Masonry, as well as the Royal Society. We see all of this overlap. We have to believe that at some level, there is going to be some influence that passes from one to the other. And keep in mind, here I'm kind of focusing on alchemy to Masonry, but you could argue that Masonry probably influenced alchemy as well, although we don't have as many alchemy fraternities these days as we used to. And chemistry isn't nearly as much fun. The point is, when two things are developing in the same area at the same time, in the same place, as we see with alchemy in the Western world, when we think of Newton and England, that is the same England, the same time, the same kings, the same influences that give us Masonry. And so why wouldn't you see parallel development? Why wouldn't you see two things that are quite similar? Now, the temptation is to go, well, they're similar and they're from the same time, so they must be the same thing. There must be a closer connection, but I would argue that that is not the case. There is no strong evidence that I'm aware of that combines the two. I can see parallel development. Obviously, alchemy develops on its own, becomes chemistry. Masonry develops on its own, influences so much of the Western world today. But be cautious, because if you're going to make the extraordinary claim that alchemy leads to Masonry, or Masonry is heavily tied to alchemy, you need extraordinary evidence. Keep that in mind. So why look at it? If I'm just going to tell you that these two things are parallel, they're from the same time, they have similar ideas, why go into it? Well, anyone will benefit from studying the ideas and the models of the inner life as expressed in alchemy. Although, as one art historian, Rupert St. Martin, called it in his study, simply entitled Baroque, the general public will probably find the emblematic cast of mind difficult, because modern people, particularly in the US, just don't think that way anymore. They don't look inward. They don't become inquisitive of the internal, because it's uncomfortable, as I talked about in the last episode. However, thinking Freemasons do. And they will benefit from such study because they resonate with the worldviews and emblematic modes of thought that were in vogue in that esoteric soup which gave us both alchemy and nascent Freemasonry, where they coexisted among intellectual circles in Europe. The point of looking into alchemy isn't to connect it to Masonry. The point of looking into alchemy is it's another pattern of thought. It's another philosophy, another way of considering life. And why wouldn't you reach out and try and study as many ideas of life as you can? How egotistical does one have to be to think that Masonry or any single group or organization has all the answers? There are 8 billion humans on this earth, and each one has a story. We're taught that. And so why wouldn't we go out and explore it to help understand the human condition, understand who we are, what we are, why we're here, and how to better serve our fellow man and fellow brother. Thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Leakey, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.